The Zyphar Dominion watched from high orbit, their massive warships casting dark shadows over the blue and green planet below. Humanity had been under observation for centuries, studied like insects in a controlled experiment. The conclusions were always the same: primitive, divided, technologically stagnant. The species showed brief moments of ingenuity, but nothing that could rival the might of an empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds without struggle. Commander Tvok stood at the helm of his flagship, the Vizerith, analyzing the latest reports. The humans were still arguing among themselves, their leaders scrambling to issue statements of unity while their militaries operated in isolation. Even their most advanced warships were laughably obsolete, relying on projectile-based weaponry and sluggish reaction speeds. The AI models predicted a 99.87% probability of total planetary control within a solar cycle. A transmission was sent to the governing bodies of Earth. The Zyphar demanded unconditional surrender. In return, humanity would be allowed to exist as a servile race, laboring under the Dominion's rule. It was a generous offer. Most species were given no choice at all. The response was slow, another sign of their inefficiency. The transmission from Earth arrived after a full rotation. "This is a sovereign world. We do not recognize your authority. Any act of aggression will be met with resistance." Tvok's mandibles clicked in amusement. They always resisted at first. The words were expected, hollow threats from a species that had never faced a force like the Zyphar. He ordered the first wave of landings to begin. A fleet of dropships descended, selecting an isolated region to establish a foothold. A small town in a sparsely populated area. The strategy was standard: disrupt communication, establish dominance, and let fear spread. The first battles were always meant to be psychological. Make them see the inevitability of their submission. The town fell within minutes. Zyphar troops moved through the streets, their sleek armor reflecting the dim light of the human moon. The local law enforcement had been neutralized without resistance. The civilians, unarmed and weak, were rounded up for processing. The AI projected mass surrender within a matter of days. Then the first explosion detonated. Tvok watched the reports with mild irritation. A fuel depot had been destroyed. Sabotage, likely by desperate remnants of local security. He ordered an immediate sweep of the perimeter, expecting nothing more than a few poorly equipped rebels attempting to make a last stand. The second explosion occurred before the first fires had even settled. Then a third. The Zyphar forces had faced resistance before. But this was different. The humans were not fighting defensively. They were striking with precision, hitting supply routes, severing command lines, and using their own terrain as a weapon. Reports came in of ambushes, small, coordinated strikes that left entire platoons dead before reinforcements could arrive. Surveillance footage revealed civilians moving through the wreckage, gathering weapons from fallen Zyphar soldiers. There were no formations, no disciplined ranks. They fought like wild creatures, unpredictable and relentless. The AI struggled to process the data, failing to recognize a pattern in their attacks. Tvok ordered reinforcements. A full battalion landed in the region, prepared to overwhelm the insurgency. But the moment the Zyphar adjusted, the humans changed tactics. They struck supply convoys, targeted communication relays, and turned every street into a battlefield. Even unarmed, they resisted, setting traps, spreading disinformation, disrupting the Zyphar's technological superiority with crude but effective countermeasures. For the first time in recorded history, the Zyphar Dominion failed to establish immediate planetary control. Tvok reviewed the footage with increasing concern. He watched as human resistance cells formed, communicating without centralized leadership, adapting to every tactical shift. A group of farmers had taken down an entire Zyphar patrol using stolen rifles and homemade explosives. Another group, untrained and without military experience, had ambushed an armored transport, disabling it with firebombs and sheer determination. The AI models adjusted the probability of total planetary control. The number dropped from 99.87% to 78.43%. Then, a day later, to 62.12%. Tvok issued new orders. More aggressive tactics. Civilian population centers were to be neutralized to instill fear. Let them see the cost of resistance. The first city was targeted. Zyphar forces moved in, expecting a broken and terrified population. Instead, they found an armed rebellion waiting for them. The humans had anticipated the attack, using the ruins of their own destroyed buildings as cover, striking from the shadows. Zyphar forces suffered losses at an unprecedented rate. The reports grew more concerning. Human technology was advancing at an impossible pace. Reverse-engineered Zyphar weapons were already appearing in enemy hands. They had learned to disrupt the Zyphar shields using electromagnetic pulses. Their cyber warfare capabilities, previously considered laughable, were now breaching Zyphar communication networks, feeding them false data, rerouting reinforcements into traps. The AI models struggled to predict human behavior. Every battle defied statistical expectations. For the first time in his career, Tvok felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. More disturbing reports followed. Human forces were no longer just reacting. They were planning, coordinating, targeting Zyphar command centers with surgical precision. Entire squadrons were disappearing without a trace. The humans were not just fighting back. They were learning. The AI models issued an unprecedented recommendation: strategic withdrawal. Tvok refused. A withdrawal would be an admission of failure. No species had ever resisted the Zyphar dominion for this long. He ordered an escalation, full planetary bombardment of resistance hubs. A final, decisive show of force. The command was never executed. Before the first bombardment could commence, a fleet of human warships arrived in orbit. Not the outdated vessels the Zyphar had dismissed. These were something new, something reverse-engineered from Zyphar technology, adapted in ways the AI could not predict. The first human counteroffensive had begun. The Zyphar Dominion had expected resistance, but not like this. Their forces were not fighting an army, they were fighting an idea. Humanity did not wage war like the other species they had conquered. They did not break when their cities fell. They did not surrender when outnumbered. If anything, they became more dangerous. Reports flooded in from across the planet. Guerrilla tactics had turned urban centers into death traps. Entire platoons vanished in bombed-out ruins, their last transmissions filled with confusion and panic. Snipers with stolen Zyphar rifles eliminated commanders before vanishing into the shadows. Supply convoys never reached their destinations, either ambushed or sabotaged in transit. The AI projections had collapsed. What was once a straightforward conquest had become a war of attrition, one that the Zyphar were unprepared to fight. Commander Tvok ordered a shift in strategy. More firepower, more control, more discipline. It didn't matter. The more the Zyphar tightened their grip, the more humanity adapted. Military leaders across Earth coordinated in ways never seen before. Nations that had once been rivals now shared intelligence. Scientists worked around the clock, reverse-engineering Zyphar technology at an alarming speed. Within days, human engineers developed signal disruptors that scrambled Zyphar targeting systems. Within weeks, experimental energy weapons were being tested in the field. The first major breakthrough came when a group of cyber warfare specialists infiltrated the Zyphar's communication network. What had once been an unbreakable system now belonged to humanity. Misinformation spread through Zyphar ranks, sowing confusion. Entire battalions received false orders, diverting them into ambushes. Supply chains collapsed as logistical data was corrupted. It was no longer just a battle of weapons, it was a battle of minds. The Zyphar High Command issued a desperate order: contain the humans at all costs. Troop reinforcements were doubled. Orbital bombardments were authorized. But the Zyphar made one critical mistake. They assumed they still controlled the battlefield. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. They had taken the war beyond Earth. Covert strike teams infiltrated Zyphar bases on the Moon and Mars, destroying key supply hubs. The first captured Zyphar warship was taken intact, its crew overwhelmed by a boarding party that had learned the ship's weaknesses from studying their own captors. Within days, humanity had its first functional interstellar vessel. The AI models adjusted the probability of Zyphar victory. 41.28%. Tvok refused to accept it. He ordered a planetary lockdown, deploying elite shock troops to crush the resistance. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The insurgency suffered heavy losses, human cities burned, and key strongholds were overrun. The Zyphar fleet regrouped, preparing for the final push to bring humanity to its knees. Then everything changed. The first coordinated human counteroffensive shattered Zyphar forces in multiple locations simultaneously. Zyphar supply caches exploded from within, detonated by human operatives who had infiltrated their ranks weeks prior. A prototype human warship, built from scavenged Zyphar materials, ambushed and destroyed a Zyphar cruiser in Earth's orbit. It was no longer just a matter of survival. Humanity had turned the tide. Zyphar officers panicked as battlefield reports became incomprehensible. Units that should have been secure were overrun within minutes. Communication networks failed entirely. Human forces moved with impossible precision, striking weaknesses the Zyphar hadn't even realized they had. The AI models adjusted again. Probability of Zyphar victory, 28.03%. For the first time in history, a Zyphar invasion force was losing. Tvok's command center was in chaos. Officers argued over conflicting reports. The AI-generated battle projections were useless, constantly shifting with every new human maneuver. The Dominion had fought thousands of wars. They had never faced anything like this. The humans did not just fight. They learned. They adapted. They improved. Within days, Earth's forces had reclaimed several key cities. Advanced Zyphar weapons, once symbols of oppression, were now in human hands. Captured Zyphar prisoners revealed critical weaknesses in their technology, allowing humanity to bypass their defenses. Then came the final blow. A human cyber warfare unit cracked the Zyphar fleet's security codes. Within hours, key warships in orbit were disabled remotely, their controls locked down by human programmers. The ships were now drifting, helpless. Their crews, once confident in their superiority, realized too late that they had underestimated the very species they sought to conquer. Tvok issued the unthinkable order: retreat. The AI models had one final update. Probability of Zyphar victory, 0.04%. The conquest of Earth had become something far worse. A lesson. The Zyphar Dominion had never known fear. They had crushed civilizations that spanned thousands of worlds. They had reduced entire species to footnotes in history. Victory was not a question, it was a certainty. Until now, Tvok stood on the bridge of his command vessel, watching the battle unfold. What should have been a planetary subjugation had become an unraveling disaster. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for dominance. The first sign of collapse was the loss of control over the orbital fleet. Human cyber warfare units had bypassed Zyphar security measures with terrifying efficiency, hijacking warships, scrambling targeting systems, and redirecting automated defenses. Several Zyphar ships turned against each other before their crews could manually override the corrupted commands. The second sign was the systematic dismantling of Zyphar supply chains. What had once been a well-oiled war machine now ran on fumes. Transport ships were ambushed before they could land. Munition stockpiles vanished overnight, either stolen or destroyed. Entire battalions found themselves cut off, left to fight without reinforcements or resupply. Then came the final sign, the realization that humanity had stopped reacting and had started hunting. The first human-built warships emerged from Earth's orbit. At first, they were crude, modified Zyphar vessels, but it didn't take long for entirely new designs to appear, ships built for speed, for precision, for war. They moved unpredictably, striking and vanishing before the Zyphar could mount a counterattack. They ignored traditional battle formations, using swarm tactics that overwhelmed larger ships by sheer force of adaptability. Zyphar forces still outnumbered the humans. They still had superior firepower, but the balance of power had already shifted. Tvok ordered the remaining fleets to regroup. He still believed victory was possible. If they could break humanity's momentum, if they could land one decisive blow, they could force a stalemate. an occupation rather than an extermination. But every attempt to regain control failed. The humans had learned too much too quickly. The final battle was not one of brute force, but of inevitability. Zyphar ships, once untouchable, fell one by one. Their armor, once impervious, now shattered under human-designed weaponry. Their formations, once perfect, became death traps as humanity exploited every weakness. The battle was no longer just being fought in space or on the ground, it was being waged in code, in tactics, in strategy. Then, a message, broadcast on all frequencies. The voice was calm, human. "Withdraw now. This is your last warning." Provoke ignored it. A final assault was his only option. He ordered every remaining Zyphar ship to push forward. They never reached their targets. The hijacked warships, once disabled, reactivated, this time under human control. They turned their weapons on their former fleet, carving through Zyphar formations with brutal efficiency. Panic spread through the Dominion's forces. Communications collapsed. Command structures disintegrated. Some ships attempted to flee, only to find their navigation systems hijacked, sending them into the crossfire of their own fleet. Provoke watched in silence as the realization set in. Humanity had done the impossible. They had turned the Zyphar's own strength against them. A final transmission arrived, relayed from one of the captured ships. "You should have left us alone." The remaining Zyphar forces broke. What was left of the fleet scattered into deep space. Those who could not escape surrendered. The battle for Earth was over. But humanity was not finished. They had been invaded. They had been underestimated. Now they had Zyphar technology, Zyphar ships, Zyphar knowledge. And they had no intention of waiting for another attack. The war was no longer about defense. It was about retribution. Humanity was coming. The Zyphar Dominion was silent. A species that had never known defeat now stood on the edge of annihilation. The war was over. The invasion had failed. But what followed was something they had never anticipated. Humanity did not stop. They reverse-engineered everything. Zyphar ships, once symbols of dominance, were now redesigned for something new: revenge. Weapons that had once threatened their extinction were improved, made more efficient, more lethal. Cyber warfare systems, once a vulnerability, had been turned into humanity's greatest strength. Within months, the first human-built interstellar fleet was operational. The first counterattack came swiftly. Zyphar outposts in nearby systems fell without resistance. The defenses had been designed to repel conventional assaults, not the sheer unpredictability of human warfare. Entire planets, once considered secure, were now isolated. Communications between sectors collapsed as human forces exploited weaknesses in the Dominion's infrastructure. The Zyphar military tried to regroup. They mobilized new fleets, deployed fresh reinforcements, and reinforced key systems. It made no difference. Humanity was not fighting for territory. They were hunting. Zyphar convoys disappeared in the void, their cargo stolen, their crews left adrift. Command ships were targeted first, throwing entire battle groups into disarray. When Zyphar fleets tried to counterattack, they found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The enemy they had once dismissed as primitive had become something else entirely, something relentless. The humans did not fight like conquerors. They fought like survivors who refused to let history repeat itself. The turning point came when the first Zyphar core world fell. Not to an overwhelming armada, but to a single precision strike. Human operatives infiltrated the planet, sabotaging planetary defenses and disabling orbital tracking systems. By the time the Zyphar realized what was happening, it was too late. A single human warship entered orbit and fired a controlled bombardment, destroying key military targets before vanishing into deep space. The planet's leadership surrendered before another attack could come. Panic spread through the Dominion. For the first time in their history, their own worlds were under siege. Their own people felt the fear they had once inflicted on others. And the humans gave no terms for surrender. No demands. No negotiations. Only a single message. "You started this. We will finish it." The Zyphar High Command fractured. Some wanted to fight to the bitter end. Others begged for a peace that would never come. But the humans did not slow down. They moved faster than the Dominion could react, striking planets, shipyards, and command centers with ruthless efficiency. Each battle was over before it had begun. The Zyphar had ruled for thousands of years. They had expected their legacy to last forever. It ended in months. One by one, Zyphar-controlled systems went dark. Some planets surrendered without a fight, hoping for mercy that never came. Others tried to resist, only to vanish from all records, their fates unknown. The Dominion's central government collapsed as human forces approached their homeworld. Provoke, once the architect of Earth's invasion, now stood as the last commander of a dying empire. He watched as human ships surrounded the Zyphar homeworld, their formation a silent reminder of everything they had endured. No threats, no demands, just the inevitable. A final transmission was sent to every surviving Zyphar leader. You had your chance. The bombardment was swift. The Zyphar homeworld burned. The Dominion was erased. Humanity had not just survived. They had won. And the galaxy would never forget what happened when they were provoked.